My name is Dr. Juan Alvarez. I am a reproductive endocrinologist at Fertility Centers of Illinois here in Chicago. We have 9 locations all over Chicago, and I practice out of the River North office here in the city, as well as in Tinley Park down south. We are a full fertility center. We do fertility treatments for infertile couples, for same-sex couples, for single parents. I started 2 years ago at FCI, right out of fellowship, and my passion going into the REI field was LGBT fertility, and so this is why I'm in these conferences. This is my second one here in Chicago. I'm really happy to be here. I'm able to answer all of your questions. I'm going to start off with then just a little bit with what the process is kind of like. There's a lot of questions on where should we start. Should we start with the gestational carrier agency? Should we start at the fertility clinic? Our fertility clinic does not have an in-house gestational carrier team, meaning that we don't find gestational carriers, and the majority of fertility clinics do not. So we work with many agencies, not just here in Chicago, in the Midwest, but all over the US. The first step would be, if you were coming to the fertility clinic, will be to come see me or one of our doctors for an initial consultation to go over what is the whole process of creating an embryo and transferring to a gestational carrier. The first step would be to do an evaluation, a medical history, sperm analysis to see if we do we have sperm to be able to fertilize the eggs. That's the first sort of step. Also looking for the egg donor. At FCI, we do have our own egg donor program. At any one time, we have about 60 women in our database, and these are women who've already been pre-screened medically and have been cleared to be able to start treatment right away. So all of our donors are on a birth control pill, and they just come off the birth control pill and start stimulation. If you guys are unable to find a specific donor that you like in our database, or they're in a cycle, or they've already maxed out the number of cycles they can do, because they can only do up to a maximum of 6 cycles of egg retrievals based on ASRM guidelines. There are a lot of other agencies that we also work with. So with an agency, the agencies, they look for women who are willing or wanting to donate eggs, and then after you guys have matched with them, then the donor will come to my office so I can do a full medical evaluation, do her testing for ovarian reserve to see if she would be a good candidate. If she's not a good candidate, obviously let the intended parents know and explain why, or use a different donor. But if she's ready to go, then that's something that we can start. I would manage the stimulation cycle for that donor, as well as doing the egg retrieval, and then our lab will do the fertilization of the eggs, growing of the embryos, and freezing them in the lab. For the gestational carrier, many couples, they go either through an agency, or they already have either a family member that is willing or wanting to become a surrogate. And so in that scenario, the surrogate will come to my office, again, to be evaluated to see if she would be a good candidate to be a gestational carrier, go over all of the risks of being a gestational carrier. Or if you're being matched with a specific agency, after you're matched with them, and usually it takes about 6 months. So a lot of couples like to start with the gestational carrier process, because it is longer than finding an egg donor. On average, about six months, and I've had some couples that even took a year to match with the gestational carrier. Both things can be done in parallel, be working with the gestational carrier, as well as stimulating the egg donor and getting embryos. After we stimulate so it can be either a fresh embryo, a fresh donor, we stimulate her, we get all of her eggs for you guys, fertilize it with your eggs, with your sperm, or a frozen eggs that are from an egg bank. For majority of my same-sex male couples, I recommend using a fresh donor rather than the frozen eggs, because with the egg banks, you get a portion of the eggs that the egg donor made. So they have them in a bank. About in one lot could be anywhere between 6 to 8 eggs. Usually with that amount of eggs, you get maybe 1 or 2 embryos. So if you want to really do a split of your donor, if you want to do 50-50, a fresh donor is usually the best way to go. On average, a fresh donor will get anywhere between 15 to 25 eggs, and you can imagine that not every single one of those eggs will become an embryo, and so when you get it from an egg bank, you're only getting a fraction of the eggs that would have become an embryo. But for single parents, only looking to have one child, it is a less expensive way to go by using an already frozen egg. Once the gestational carrier is matched, then I review her history, her OB history, make sure that she is a good candidate. I also do an evaluation of her cavity, doing an ultrasound, making sure that everything is okay for the transfer. So I would meet the surrogate twice, one for the evaluation and one for the actual transfer. Once she's been cleared by one of the doctors, then we pick the protocol, stimulate her. That usually takes around 4 weeks to do. She has to be on a birth control pill, then 2 weeks of estrogen, and then that's when we do the embryo transfer. And so I'm going to open up to any questions that anybody might have. Yes, it usually is the same birth control pills for at least 2 weeks, and then starting the hormone injections to stimulate the ovaries to grow the eggs, and that usually takes around 10 to 12 days. Other questions that people, most intended parents have, cost. How much is this going to cost? It usually is an out-of-pocket expense because most insurances do not cover fertility treatments for same-sex male couples. I've had one that have, but he had some kind of insurance that did cover it. So I always would recommend to call your insurance and ask them, what are your fertility benefits? What do they cover? Do they cover IVF? Do they cover just a simple workup where they do the sperm analysis and blood test? Do they cover fertility drugs that could also be used for your egg donor or your surrogate? Do they cover embryo transfers? And so that you have an idea of if you have some coverage. If there is no coverage, at FCI we do have different packages where the cost up front for using either our egg donor with one or multiple embryo transfers, or if you're using an agency, what the cost would be to just stimulate the donor and then also doing the transfer to the gestational carrier, and we have that information on our table. Yes, you have a question. Aside from proximity, there really isn't any benefit. I would recommend to look at the SART database, which is all of the fertility clinics. They have to give their success rates, and it's called the SART database, looking at what are their pregnancy rates based on female's age, if it's a fresh or frozen embryo transfer, or you're transferring to a surrogate. So based on that data, you can sort of choose to see who has the best rates, and if traveling would be something that would be beneficial for the overall outcome. As far as pricing, it depends on what other clinics are charging, but usually by going to some other clinic doesn't really save money. I would say looking at pregnancy rates, SART data, and then looking at what are the interests of the clinic.
So if we only wanted to do single embryo transfer, but we wanted to fertilize the other eggs, would you freeze those, or would you send them off to someone to be frozen that we could use them later? How would that work?
Yeah, so we fertilize all of the eggs. We grow them out, and then on the fifth day of development, they're a blastocyst stage embryo, and then we freeze them. So we will freeze all the embryos that are created that are of a good quality. Um, I would say 99% of cycles are usually frozen embryo transfers where we are not doing fresh, where the surrogate is being stimulated at the same time as the donor. And so when we do the egg retrieval, get the embryo, we don't immediately transfer it to the surrogate. Most of the time is creating the embryos, freezing them, a lot of time doing genetic testing on the embryo first, and then transferring it to the surrogate. And then I personally do recommend single embryo transfers. So single embryo transfers. Everybody wants twins, right? um, two babies, one shot, you're done, right? But usually it's not the case. There's more risks to the surrogate. With twin pregnancies, higher rates of gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, preterm delivery, having to stay at home from work because of complications or preterm labor. So usually the safest way to have a healthy baby is one at a time. At our center, we do and we have transferred more than one embryo, maximum of two, because of the age of the donor. If we transfer more than two, very high risks of triplets and quadruplets. It's about a 1 to 2% risk that any one of those embryos will split into a monozygotic twin. So maximum two, recommending one. Genetic testing. So that's something that everybody always asks about. Should we not? If you're using a young donor, less than 30 years of age, about 15% of her embryos are going to be genetically abnormal. So that basically is what the genetic testing is for. Usually it's recommended for women older than 38 years of age because we start to see a decline in pregnancies and an increase in genetic abnormalities. And so a genetically abnormal embryo is not going to cause a pregnancy, or if it does, it will lead into a miscarriage. So that's something that a lot of people want to avoid, but it's not a very high risk or even using a young egg donor. Other reasons would be for gender selection, because we do get the gender when we do the genetic testing. We get output of either 46XX or 46XY, girl or boy embryo with a 46 copies of its chromosomes, and so we know that that embryo has a high chance of causing a pregnancy. Yes.
Do you also do like male fertility, like checking to make sure that you're able to fertilize the eggs?
Yes, so that starts with the initial consultation. We do sperm analysis. If the sperm analysis shows that there is some abnormality, I would repeat it because even normal fertile men have an abnormal semen analysis here and there. So with one, you can't get the whole picture. If in the second analysis there is an abnormality, then we do refer to a urologist who's a male infertility specialist, and we have a group that we send to do a full evaluation, physical exam, hormone testing to see why it is that the numbers are low. But as long as there is some sperm in the ejaculate, we can still use it. We do intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where we take a single sperm and we inject it directly into the egg to force fertilization. And so with that technology, we only need one sperm for each egg that we get. So even if we have low sperm counts, there's still the possibility of fertilizing the eggs. Any other questions?
Does your center offer a guarantee program?
We don't have a guarantee as far as you pay one fee, and if you don't have a pregnancy at the end of the day, you get money back. We do have different packages where we have unlimited embryo transfers in a package where we would keep transferring either to the same surrogate or a different surrogate as long as you have embryos, and it won't be an added cost. But the majority of you're using a young donor and going into the uterus of a woman who's already been pregnant before. She's already very high chances of conceiving. I always quote greater than 70% chance with the first embryo transfer. And majority of the transfers that I've done, either pregnancy with the first or the second transfer.
You guys work with the GPAP program?
Kristen? I can't remember. Are we part of the GPAP program? I believe so. But we'll double check on that. Okay. This is the second year we're here, so we're trying to get myself out into the community.
What's the additional cost of the second implantation, and what's the additional cost of fixing?
Yes. So the cost of ICSI is $1,200. Each embryo transfer would be just the cost of the embryo transfer. So monitoring and the transfer itself, it's $3,500 to do a transfer. Yes. Unless you're in the package, which includes either one transfer or I believe for $5,000 more, it's unlimited transfers. ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. That's where we inject the sperm directly into the egg. There was a question back there. How do we handle the embryo transfer if you have to change your surrogate? Well, the new surrogate will have to go through the same evaluation, physical exam, medical history, all of that to be cleared. And then after that, after she's been cleared, then birth control pills, stimulation, transfer.
If an embryo does split after doing a single embryo transfer, is there additional costs that are associated with that, even though you only did the one?
I believe for the gestational carrier, there is an additional cost. For us, in our clinic, there is not. When there's the legal contract with the gestational carrier, it says, we're going to transfer one, but in case there's an extra, if it splits, then there's an extra fee because of that, for the surrogate, not for the clinic. Yes. It's 1.5%. Yes. What's the statistic of a embryo splitting? All right. Thank you, everybody.